Welcome to another episode of Impact Talks. Today we have a great guest with us who knows a lot about connected driving. I don't want to give too much away from his background. I'd rather give it to you, Floris. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Lova, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to be a part of your show. My name is Floris from the Klashorst. I've worked in various industries, various companies, but I think I'm a father and a husband first. I've been working in software and products and services most of my life. I've studied technology in Delft University. That was a long time ago for people like yourself. I'm from a different generation, but my daughter is now studying in Delft, so I'm now reconnected to Delft again, which is a great thing. So I love the technology, I love the innovation, I love sort of how actually we live in very exciting times where a lot of things are happening. So that's what excites me a lot in terms of who I am. I love to work on technology, both software, hardware, new innovations, but also old-fashioned technology, old cars, old houses, old boats, and I love to combine that with a business acumen and creating things that make sense for people. That's basically what I do.
Great, because when I was looking into you, I noticed your background was mostly in connected driving. I've seen stints in Nokia, Volkswagen Group. Obviously, you just came out of there. I saw you did things with Renault-Nissan. So can you kind of explain a little bit more what you did there? What kind of innovations were you a part of?
Yeah, I think it's a whole journey, from the first job that I did in space engineering up to the last job at Volkswagen, where I was leading the strategy and the partnering for autonomous vehicles. So you can only connect the dots when you look back, right? So
where did it
Volkswagen,
start?
It started, I think, my interest in innovation started, I think, at university already, where I was, if you compare like today and the time that I started at university, I think there's so much more information, there's so much more resources you can use to sort of think what you can do. There's so many more startups, examples of companies, of great innovation ideas in the market. When I started, I think I made my decision to go to university based on a half an A4 folder, right? So it's really, really different compared to that. So that was a time of discovery. And when I started university, I was starting with a typewriter. When I graduated, I was graduating on a personal computer, right? So within the time of my studies, the whole world changed. And I've been embracing that change, I think, from that day onwards, also during my whole professional life. So that's the reason I think I've been working for about 8 different companies in different parts of the world, and across many different industries, from space engineering to civil engineering to advertisement to telecommunications and automotive.
So after university, what was the first job? Was it space engineering right away, or?
Yeah, I went to developing attitude and orbit control systems for satellites, for Earth observation and space observation. So that means modeling. When you shoot a satellite in the air, and at that time we didn't have OTA, right? There's no over-the-air updates, and so you had to test everything up front. So you had the sensors, the actuators, like the small rockets, and the actuator wheels. And you got the magnetometers, and you got GPS, and all kinds of different sensors that look at the sun and look at the Earth, etc.
Just to give context,
so we had to model that.
Just to give context, Sorry? When was this? What was the year?
This was in 89.
Great.
I started doing that 89. It was the time before the Iron Curtain was down.
Wow.
Right? So we were doing projects with Russians and Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts at that time, going into Leningrad, also cosmonaut city, and going into the Russian Space Agency in Moscow. Really, really different times, and enormous differences between how the Americans did it and the Russians did it on a much lower budget. Right? So that was extremely exciting to be part of, seeing that innovation is different, is possible in different ways, in expensive ways and in cheap ways, right, or cost-effective ways. I was also, like I said, once you have a satellite in the air, you cannot get it back, so you have to test it up front. You have to specify it all up front, right? There was no agile development at that time. It was like a gymnasium full of documents, right, that had to be reviewed for 4 weeks in a row before you could get a sign-off from the customer, for instance.
So these were all written documents, obviously, because the personal
all written
computer,
documents. Faxing documents of 400 pages to Italy, right? And now, so that is, if I just look back at all those years, I've encountered a lot of change, right? So. And I still think that one of the great things that I've been able to do, and I've had the luck to be involved in, is be always part of that innovation. So despite maybe my date of birth, I'm still a digital native in terms of that I've always been able to continue working with young people, startups, new technologies in every company that I worked for, and that's also what I always did in the company. So I've started new businesses, introduced innovation, combined that into new teams, building a new business, spinning that off, establishing it, and then actually move on to another company or a new project. So that's a little bit of the repeating pattern, if you want.
So just for me to know, so when you started with the company, was this like a government-owned company?
No, that was Fokker Aircraft at that time. So that doesn't exist anymore. It was like Boeing and like Airbus, right? It was in Netherlands, of course. It was one of the let's say proud companies of the Netherlands, and they had one division, Fokker Space, and that still exists. So Fokker Aircraft, in the end, didn't make it, right? But Fokker Space still exists. Was, I think, at a certain moment acquired by Stork. Is now independent again, and it's still doing a lot of solar panels. For instance, they were a leading company in solar panels in space for satellites and other spacecraft.
So how long did you work there, and after a while, when
7 years.
did you decide to move on?
I worked there for 7 years. So first years I was programming, simulating, developing. After that I became more of a program manager, managing subcontractors, building software and parts for us. We were developing the European robotic arm for the International Space Station at that time. And that's where also I think being educated in a very international environment, working with a consortium of many different players in an international fashion.
Because how many players were working on the robotic arm? I can imagine pretty much everyone.
About 30 companies in total.
From how many countries do you think?
I think all of the European countries, right? Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, all the sort of the novel ones. They had suppliers as well. So maybe not 30, maybe 20 companies, but all the ESA, so they have like members, right? The member countries from ESA, and then of course Canada, Russia, US, and then countries that were involved from other parts, so also some Asian countries at the time.
But so how does your day-to-day look like on a project like that? Do you just stay within your own bubbles? Everything is very connected? No.
If there's one thing which is clear throughout the years, is that it's very hard to do things on your own. So you always need others. You need to focus on your strengths, and you need to focus on the strengths of your partners, and together, I think only then you will reach the results that you want. That time, I think that industry, going back to your earlier question, why did you leave, etc. Because I'm not only technology, I'm not only innovation, I'm also kind of a business-minded person. So if you would say innovation, product, and business in a sort of triangle, I'm right in the middle of that. I always want to combine the three, right? Technology for the sake of technology alone is not necessary. A product that nobody wants is not good, and if you don't make money, it's also not good. So I'm really looking for that balance inside those three, and I'm interested in all three. Now, in space, there's no business, right? So everything is government funded. You are allowed to make a kind of preset profit as a company, right? But after that, all the change is gone, so you're eating all your profit basically, and you end up with a very small margin. So if you want to create initiatives, you want to be entrepreneurial, if you want to have a different approach of doing things, right? That was almost not possible. So I was missing that business component. There was plenty of innovation and challenge, right, from a technology point of view, but from a business perspective, I would say that was completely different at the time. So that was missing. There was also a time we are now in a crisis with Corona, and we're referring to the crisis of '89 now. And so that was and mid '90s. So there was not a lot of employment, so I left at
Can
that
you
time.
give context to the viewers at the time what crisis you were experiencing, and
so
and how did it feel?
No, there was just not a lot of employment. There was not a lot of jobs. There was a lot of high unemployment in the mid '90s, second half of the '90s, so '96, '97. But I wanted to get out, right? I wanted to get out, so I moved completely my spectrum. I went to a company that was just recently spun off of the government. That was at that time Holland Rail Consult, was an engineering consultancy company. And they were building the high-speed train towards the south, and the high-speed train for goods, towards the east, towards Germany, and all the kind of rebuilding of stations and railways in Holland. So pure Holland-based. I was hired as a program manager there to manage large infrastructure projects like rebuilding the station of Arnhem. Rebuilding parts of the tracks across the country, sitting in the middle of the night, doing with the installation and the workers, making sure that the tracks and the trains could run again at 7 o'clock in the morning, because everybody. So completely different ball game, which was. Very interesting to experience. I got to learn how to sort of manage expectations of customers, deliver on time and within resources, etc. All the things that as a program manager you typically do. But I was missing this innovation, and I was missing this international component in my work. So at a certain time, I think it was after 2 years, at that time I was running the whole engineering division of that company. So it was about 110, 120 engineers working on all those big projects.
You were in charge of hiring them as well, and
yeah, also growing, because there was so much work at that time with the high-speed trains. So I grew that division from about 30 to 110, 120 people.
Because what type of work goes into developing what you were developing?
Designing the tracks, so the
how is it different
the track
than the normal track?
Well, the curves are different, for instance, and the canting and sort of the inclination of the rails, because the speeds are higher. But you have also it was also normal tracks, so there you have the crossings, the stations, etc. So everything that relates to the rail infrastructure, and of course, rail infrastructure often collides with other infrastructure like roads. So the engineers were designing how the tracks would run, what the sort of design of the tracks would be on the different speeds, and of course also the electrification above it, right? So different voltages, different security systems that trains don't run into each other, so that kind of things. Yeah. But it was also the time of GSM starting at the time, first generation GSM.
Yeah.
So then Ericsson approached me, and I had to run the first programs of rolling out the first GSM networks in the Netherlands. And I
How
had
do
this.
they approach you? Like, what was
That was just headhunted, yeah, recruiter.
headhunted.
Yeah.
What did you do to attract the kind of attention of the headhunter, you think?
Well, there was no LinkedIn at that time, so that was pure mouth to mouth.
Okay.
So I don't know who contacted or who gave me a reference or whatever, but they approached me. They said, "Well, we've heard about you. You have been referred to," and at that time there was no transparency in this kind of thing. You didn't know. Now with LinkedIn and other kind of recruiting sites, it's a bit different. But the good thing there was I had all this software background, I had this system engineering background from space, and I had the civil engineering background from my second company, and that was exactly what you needed in telecoms to roll out these first networks, right? Network infrastructure, a lot of civil engineering, building all those sites, understanding how the telecoms network with the central repositories for data, the home location register, etc., the whole system in itself and the data. So it was a perfect mix. So we started to build the first networks for KPN, for Ben at that time, for Telfort, etc. With Ericsson and first value added services. That's, I think, the first time that we really started to look at what else you could do with telecom networks. And this was in 98, right? 98, 99. Yeah. Because we started to put modems in vending machines, so we could do a remote reboot, remote looking at fault codes without, so not sending someone in a van to a location where the vending machines were. So that was the first time that we really started to do something of remote management, remote monitoring, remote fault detection, debugging, things like that, on first generation networks. So we started to build a group, system engineering. That was then we were in the 2000, year 2000. A friend of mine had started a company because that in the year 2000 the telecom law was opened up. You could at that time you could buy minutes and resell the minutes. So the monopoly of KPN was ended at that time. So everybody could become a kind of a telecom provider by buying capacity on the existing networks. Right? So we started to do that for the conferencing business and for some other B2B businesses. So I joined that company. I left Ericsson and I became we basically had our startup, became an entrepreneur there.
You became like a co-founder. You got stakes in the company, or?
Yeah, I invested and became an equal partner. I didn't found it. That my friend founded it a year before, and he asked me to join. And I said, "Well, why not? Yes. Sounds like a good adventure." And although I was perfectly happy at Ericsson building that, but I was just also curious, right?
Why take the risk though? Why? What was happening in your mind around that time that you decided to go into a startup environment and leaving your safe job?
I think it was too predictable. I think at that time, I think it was a combination of things. I think if you look at the Ericsson job, it was great people, intelligent people, big challenge, but I knew what the next year would look like, right?
Yeah.
And the year after, probably. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think I had other interests. And I was just curious how that would be. Can I do that? Do I want that? So we decided, and it was also a time, of course, of a lot of I would say, positive examples, right? The year 2000, of course, that's the .com, the bubble, right? There was a lot of sort of good and bad examples at that time, but there was a lot of investments. So it felt also like a good opportunity and a good time to start doing something. We never had external funding. We had at the end, we had, I think, about 6 people employed. Some partners that were developing software. But one big project we did, aside from consulting and reselling telecom minutes, was we did a complete business redesign of the RAI conference center in Amsterdam.
Because that's one
So
of
at that
the
time,
bigger ones, I think, next
yeah,
to the Ziggo Dome.
At that time, the Ziggo Dome didn't exist at that time. Of course.
Yeah.
There was only RAI, right, and maybe something in Arnhem or something. But, and the Doelen, and there was in Utrecht the Jaarbeurs. That was it, right? But at that time, if you wanted to have a booth at a conference, you have to, for the carpet, you had to send a fax to somebody. To get some walls, you need to call. It was like completely fragmented.
Yeah.
For everything that you needed. If you need a table or water or whatever, there was always a different company, a different form, a different phone number, etc. So we did an analysis of all those suppliers and all the sort of variants of what is needed there, internet access, telephone access, etc. And we brought it all online. So we basically digitized the whole conference process, which was all analog and phone-based and fax-based, and we brought that online as a first digital representation of RAI's conference business with that company. So again, that was like a combining innovation, right? This was the first time that everybody got on the web. Most people just put a digital folder of their analog, but we started to really do transactions and be able to order things. And then when you came to the booth, the internet was there, the carpet was there, and things like that. So connecting the back ends of those suppliers to a front end of the RAI. Really interesting, difficult, because a lot of resistance, of course, in these companies, because, never done that way, why should we change? And so the normal resistance you would have in every company when you do changes, right?
So why did they eventually do it?
Well, in the end, this is always a process where you try to win over the enthusiasm of other people based on the value of such a new way of doing things. And in the end, it's often about money. If you can show them that they can create more money at less cost, then it starts to become very easy. Because these are small entrepreneurs, small business owners that, if there's one thing that small business owners often know very well, it's the bottom line, right? So if they can earn more at less cost, they don't have to understand to say yes to it. And of course, and this was driven from the RAI Congress Center, and these suppliers were supplying to RAI, and they had to sort of course, continue that business. They wanted to maintain a supplier. So in that sense, for them, this was a necessary change also to stay a supplier.
How did you guys get into... How old was the company at that point? How did you get into...
2 years or so. Yeah, that was. I think you gain the trust from a sponsor in a company like that based on the projects that you do. It starts with a small project. It starts maybe with one thing. It started with with an internet cable in a booth. Right, that's where Hobby started, offering telecom data, and then they say, why don't we expand this to more things in the booth? So we started on our core, on our strengths. We made sure that worked, right, and then you expand. That's what you see a lot also now to today in the companies. If there's one way that startups often start, right, it's one thing that you do from start to end, make sure that works, and then expand, make it broader. Right? Mm-hmm. Don't try to solve the whole world from the start. So yeah, do the first thing right, gain the trust, and then expand. But yeah, so that was... it was not really clear how we would continue with that company. There were there were 3 partners. I don't want to go too detailed in that, but there was not enough basis to continue. So I decided to look around, and then I sent a letter to Nokia. Nokia was number 3 in the world at the time, and they said, why don't you come and have a conversation? So I went to Nokia at that time.
Wait, after how many years in the startup did you decide to...
That was 1 year only. It was just 1 year.
Wow.
But that's okay.
But why, can I go a little bit deeper? Like, why after 1 year did you decide to move on? Or
it was on personal reasons between my other 2 partners. I think let's leave it at that.
So it's not like the growth was suddenly slowing down.
No, we were positive. Our business was good. Our projects were running, and I didn't want to continue in that environment. So the business itself continued, but for me, it was not the right choice.
So then you just pretty much write a letter to the Nokia headquarters, or how did you?
Yeah, to Nokia. At that time, it was just an open solicitation.
Okay.
So, Nokia Netherlands was one of the larger, and of course I worked at Ericsson, right? So I knew a little bit about these kind of business companies. Ericsson was bigger at that time, especially networks, also in headsets. Nokia was the challenger at that time. But we were getting close to the second generation, or even our third generation, almost of GSM networks at that time. And so I was joining Nokia there as the head of the consulting and services team for Western Europe. So I had my international, I had my innovation again. So and that turned out to be a very, very nice time. So we were selling a lot of value-added services on top of the 3G networks that we were also selling. We had lead customers in Norway, in UK, in Denmark, who were more advanced than other companies with the first services from operators, right? At that time, it was called Walled Garden. They wanted to develop their own service, their own branded services. In the end, that, of course, didn't scale. Those lessons we've all learned, right? You have to open up innovation platforms, etc. But, you only learn that after the failure of some other business approaches. But it was also the time that the emergence of the first software platforms at that time on mobile.
Well, what year was that again?
So I started in Nokia in 2001, after 9/11.
Yeah.
That was in October or September, right, in 2000. So I started in the networks business, so selling the networks plus the added value. Value-added services on top of that. Value-added services at that time, what it was, voicemail, SMS servers, those kind of things, right? So, and the first location-based services. So based on triangulation between the towers, you could more or less say where somebody was, etc. So, and then the first when the first internet phones came, like the WAP phones. And GPRS, first 3G phones, the first kind of trials for services, I would say. Like I said, emergence of platforms. So in 2000 and I think 2003 or 4, we started, and that's a very interesting time, and also something that you see happening now again and again and again with many industries. Nokia was a hardware company, right? But the business and the technology was moving to software. So, and I think that has been the core of my business from then onwards, I would say. So we had our first platform. And Nokia understood the platform kind of benefit extremely well. So we had we started with the Symbian platform, Series 60 phone, right? We started to make sure that the platform was big. We started to license it to all the phone manufacturers, Motorola, Siemens, HTC. They all used Series 60s and Symbian. We had 85 or 90% of market share at that time. We had 500 million users using our email and all this, so huge numbers. So at that time I was working in the US. I moved to the US in 2005. I was there until 2010, and I was working with all the media companies on building a stack of services on top of our platform. Extremely interesting times. I think I was at Spotify the second week after it was founded, right? We did trials with them.
The second week after it was founded?
Something like that, yeah.
How did you end up?
Yeah, it was just like, well, Nokia at that time, I went to Nokia for the Nokia Music Service because it was so easy. It was such a compelling. Everybody now listens to music on their phone, right? But at that time we just finished using our cassette deck players, right? How do you call it? The Walkmans.
Yeah, the Walkman.
Right, and so we were putting the MP3s on the phones, right? At that time, so we started our music. I went to Nokia to US for the music strategy, and started to work with all the labels. And at that time, all the artists wanted to be preloaded on Nokia phones because it was distribution for them.
Yeah.
Right. So we worked with all the great names at that time and met all the top stars at that time who were leading, who wanted to get a deal with Nokia and to be preloaded for distribution.
Do you have some good stories about people you met? And
yeah. So Alicia Keys, Prince.
What was the funniest story? Or
yeah. I think we also had the Nokia Music Theater at New York at Times Square. So we did events there. I think funny stories is just I would say there's more funny stories from space time, actually, from the astronauts and then from music time, because it's such a different world. There's so much money involved that there's a high level of arrogance was at that time in the industry, right? So that industry was purely in denial that they would get this disrupted, right?
The music industry, right?
Yeah. So at the time when we went to Consumer Electronics Show, right? At that time we were sitting together with Kazaa, right? The first MP3 share, had the first Kazaa app on Nokia. That was just really a war, right, between those startups and those disruptors and the traditional music industry. The labels that were sitting on the contracts, the artists. For the first time, the artists saw an opportunity to be independent from labels for distribution, right? But they still wanted a lot of money. So it was not it was glamorous, right? So we went to the Grammys, etc. So the glamour was nice to be there. I didn't come from that industry at all, so I wasn't raised or born in glamour or in that music industry. So there was a lot of glamour which we as a company were not used to, and so I think the funniest thing was that at a certain moment, one producer, I cannot mention his name, he took us to this nightclub where there were just people coming in to become part of the new boys band, and then after that, so we saw 100 guys singing, and some people had to stay, another went, and then the next 2 hours there were hundreds of girls coming in for the next girls band, etc. It was like a machine. It was completely all the artistic kind of element was completely removed. It was a machine trying to create a new hit, and so that was a bit disappointing also, right? So there was a lot of glamour, a lot of arrogance, not always so artistic, right? So I think now with the artist being much more liberated, having more freedom, you see, I think a lot more sort of the artisticity back in that. So I think that's also where innovation technology has helped that industry to be less dependent from the big labels as well. But still, it was an amazing time, of course. And so we acquired a company. We set up services. We had, at that time, the biggest competitor was Microsoft and Yahoo Music. Apple Store didn't exist yet. It was just coming. They had iTunes, but no stores yet. So we did new business models, right? We had business models like comes with music. That means you had unlimited music included in when you were buying the phone. A little bit like the streaming streaming now, right?
How
So we
did
didn't have to
you
care.
arrange that? Did you guys get Spotify to do it, or
No, the Spotify didn't exist at the time. We made deals, made our own deals
Oh,
with
okay.
the labels. So went to Warner, Universal, etc. I made deals with them.
So when did you meet Spotify? And when did you? How did they play into the
Spotify,
story?
I never met Spotify in that time because it didn't exist. That was Pandora, which I said.
Oh,
Did I
Pandora.
say Spotify? I meant Pandora.
Oh,
So
Pandora.
in
Okay,
in US.
but
But also other
maybe
services,
another
right?
question. Maybe another question, because I read a couple of books, also the biography of Steve Jobs, and there they went
Yeah.
really deep into setting up, talking with the labels, convincing them. Very traditional industry. So apparently, you guys were doing that as well, trying to convince them to
Yeah.
do this. And then, were you in charge of actually calling them and doing?
Yeah, I was sitting around a table. It was at that time, for instance, Jimmy Iovine was working at Universal, and I was dealing with him.
So how? My first question, I guess, is how do you get in touch with someone? Because Jimmy Ivan at that time was one of the biggest, I think.
Yeah,
If he's still
well,
not.
Nokia was one of the biggest, so that helps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you worked for Nokia. They need distribution. We had 500 million people buying a new phone at that time.
Oh, okay. So
So
you
getting
just
in
reach
touch
out.
was not the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, and say, hey, we're interested to talk. And say, when can you come? So
And for them, it's distribution. So you said pretty much in.
it's distribution.
And so once you had Jimmy Ivy, did you start with him, and did you then move on to the other labels, or what was the secret?
Well, Universal is the biggest, so you need to have them all four if you want to be relevant for consumers. So I think I don't know what order it was, but you never start with him. You start with smaller people.
Oh, you start with
climb
smaller. Because I've always gotten the
I
advice.
think we started with
big.
Warner, I believe. No. Yes, you need to have them all the four labels. Otherwise, you don't have the songs that people want. But you don't start with the top boss, right? The first call is never. First call, they have people, and they are business development people. And that's where you start, and then you have an interest. You have a pitch, and then if the pitch is interesting, the next level will get involved. That's how it works, of course.
Okay. So then you started negotiating with them, and the thing that convinced them was the distribution power that you guys had?
That was what we had. They had the songs, and we had the distribution.
But what's in it for them? Because to me, it sounds like they would lose money if they would release,
it is almost free, right, to put an MP3 on a phone, and it costs money to sort of print a CD and print an LP at that time.
Oh, but they would get royalty for every phone sold then.
Of course. Yeah. So that's the sort of the music store business model. Buy a song, song by song. At that time was the prevalent. Streaming only came later. And what we could do, for instance, for us it was beneficial if we had like 3 songs preloaded on a phone, and then people would. So I think with U2 we had one of their new albums was preloaded on a Nokia phone only, and that was the only place where you could get it for the first 6 months.
Really?
So that is, for us, it was just marketing. We could spend that money instead of a marketing campaign, and people would just buy the phone. Things like that.
How did they agree to this? Why Nokia? Why not someone else at the time? Just because Nokia was the biggest?
Yeah, of course. We were like I said, we had 500-600 million phones per year.
And
at that time, the number 2 was like maybe I think less than 100.
Okay, so pretty much you leverage being one of the biggest, and then
like Android is now 85% of the market, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a developer, you start developing for Android, not for iOS. And iOS has more value per user, right? But Android has more volume in terms of users. So if you're looking for distribution, you go for Android. If you're looking for value, you go to iOS.
Clear. But so pretty much you started innovating and entering new industries by pretty much just leveraging being the biggest.
Yeah.
So then maybe kind of jumping ahead.
Now, biggest reach, right? Not the biggest, but the biggest reach.
Yeah, biggest reach. But then maybe a question for me is, if Nokia was innovating that much and doing such, completely different things, how come it eventually, became less relevant?
Yeah, I have a vision on that. There are many books on that. Still,
Yeah.
I think the ultimate book on what happened to Nokia is still not written in my mind. But I think that comes back to our channel and the platform. So the I don't know how much you are a software guy of yourself, right? But if you start to fragment your platform, you start to your maintenance load goes up a lot, right? You have to if you have two lines of code, three main lines of code, you have to maintain three platforms, and if your number of resources limited, your innovation speed slows down and your maintenance goes up.
Yeah.
Now, it's simple logic, I would say. Our channel to the market in Nokia were the operators, the carriers, so the Oranges, the Vodafones, etc. At that time, there were more than today, right? That market has consolidated for a large part. Every country had 4 or 5 or so, and they all felt that they were unique and different, and they all had their own services, they all had their own UI, they all had their own brand. So, and as they were the gatekeepers to our customers, right, they had a lot of requirements. So we had like 300 channels. We had 300 different operators, and we had to sort of customize our platform a lot for those channels. So our platform became hugely fragmented, and because of that, our innovation speed got down. And your resources are not unlimited, so the cost went up for innovation, and basically in the end, our innovation others were catching up and they were passing us by. So our platform got fragmented, and we didn't move to another platform in time. To a new platform is a different strategy. Right? We had our internal Migo Linux-based platform, which was a good platform. We could have done that. We could have gone to Android. In the end, we went to Microsoft, but I think it was too late already at that time. Aside from maybe other things.
But so in general, based on the logic that you're saying right now, one of the best things that Apple did when Steve came back was pretty much cut out everything that didn't belong and then focus on a couple of things and do them really right, so that there would be more budget for innovation there.
Well, he made a unique, he had one channel, right? AT&T. And he said he had nothing to lose, right? He came from zero. So he could be very strong in his negotiation to AT&T and say, no, I'm not going to take the AT&T brand in my interface. The interface is how I define it.
So when the iPhone
and
was
that
released.
that worked very well. And that was nice, right? People liked it. So that was a basis to sort of continue that. And his biggest, and he developed his independent channels, right, in his own stores a lot. So he didn't have that fragmentation in his channel to the customer. So he could stick to it. And you've seen, there's a good example, Apple is a good example, who's very rigid and very disciplined in their platform approach. Right? They don't break their own platform. They force you to buy new chargers, but yeah.
Do you agree with that philosophy, or do you think there are some flaws to it?
Well, if you compare the two leading platforms, iOS and Android, you see that there's more developers, so there's a little bit more innovation on Android, but there's also more issues maybe on privacy, so it's more difficult to protect. So there's pros and cons for both, I think. So finding the right balance between the two is what the challenge is.
Great.
But yeah, going back to those times like innovation, Nokia was so at that time Facebook, right, was predominantly on the computer, and we had these meetings where we were sitting with the first Facebook mobile team developing what 4 features should we make in the first mobile application for Facebook, right? Also preloaded on the Nokia phones, etc. So things like that. Started advertisement business, again a new business. Advertisement was moving also. And all these services were hard to monetize, right? Nobody was willing to pay for it, so you have to have another business model. So we started display advertisement and click-based advertisement in some of the services as a monetization possibility for our partners that were building apps, right, for our phones. It's good business. Build media networks with all the media companies, CNN, MTV, New York Times, you name it, were part of our platform. There's also a global. We had teams in China, Australia, Europe, all over Europe, US, also based on an acquisition, right? Because we, of course, we didn't have that competence in house. So many of these kind of things that I think you've seen repeated in the years to come, right? And Nokia was very early. Nokia was always very early with it, but we lost the edge in that platform. So that was.
Why do you think? Do you think it's because of the fragmentation that the edge was always lost, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it became too expensive to maintain the platform, and after that we couldn't catch up anymore.
So if you turn this back to, like, let's say startups that are growing right now, what tips would you give them if they actually become early movers and then start growing? Would the kind of answer be just focus and yeah?
I think, yeah. So as a startup, if you have enough funding and if you have an investor that understands that, you probably get the time to build the right platform, right experiences. If you don't have that, if you have a more short-term investor or you're short of cash, then you often have you're often kind of there's not enough. You don't have enough ability to say no sometimes to a customer that wants something that takes you off course, right? Because you need the cash, you need the money. So that is difficult for startup to sort of say no if you're in need of cash because that customer. So you have to really, really make sure that you don't fall into that trap of fragmenting your core because of short-term funding needs, because that you won't recover from that.
So pretty much.
So the right investor, is I think the right investor is if you have a short-term investor and you have a platform approach that takes some years, you probably have a lot of debates in your regular update meetings.
So yeah, pretty much focusing on having enough cash flow for the future, having the right investor that eventually, if you have to say no to clients to avoid fragmentation, that you just say no.
Yeah.
And that way you can. Do you think that's maybe why, even though there's like the streaming wars happening, Netflix is still relevant because they're just focusing on one core thing?
Yeah, I think they are not startups anymore, right?
No.
So they have scale. Netflix has such a scale.
Yeah, but they are still not losing their relevancy like Nokia lost it.
Yeah, but they have no fragmentation in the channel, right?
Yeah, so that's maybe why. So, it's very interesting. Sorry, continue with your of course, story.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We can talk about many different things. So, and then of course, in 2010, sort of my journey in New York ended a little bit. So I went back to Europe. That I think 1 or 2 years prior to that, Nokia had acquired Navteq.
Who did you acquire?
Navteq.
Okay.
Navteq is the biggest map data provider, right? So in Netherlands we all know TomTom.
Yeah.
But Navteq is like 10 times bigger than TomTom. And TomTom is a great company, and Navteq is a great company, but it was originated in the US and has a lot larger market share in the B2B business, or automotive business. TomTom has always been stronger in in consumer business,
Mm-hmm.
right? With the what do you call this? The things that you put in the car, your TomTom, etc. So with the small devices.
Yeah.
And Navtec has always been more in the embedded software in vehicles and map data. So it's a bit different business model. But in terms of if you compare TomTom business and Navtec business in automotive at that time, was a huge difference in terms of size. So it was Nokia invested in a couple of startups, also in Gate 5 navigation company in Berlin, to have a navigation app on the phone, right?
Yeah.
At that time, it was that time that was completely open. There were maybe 10 or 15 players. Google Maps was one, Gate 5 was one. There was many others. So we had the map data, we had Nokia services, etc. So we bundled some of those groups together, and I was right there at the start when I went back from US to Europe. I was part of that new setup, and we called it Nokia Location and Commerce. So we had our local advertisement, which was a lot based on location.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We had Gate 5, which is a navigation app. We had Navtec, which was all the map data, and we had the whole Nokia services team that was able to sort of bring new services to the phones and to the market with the engineers and the business development and sales capacities we had. So that was a new business, new division in Nokia, and there I started with a new part in that called B2B. So we were doing automotive and the transportation of goods and the truck market was our business, and that quickly developed into automotive primarily.
How did you make such a switch from New York to?
Because we saw the convergence. Because we saw the convergence from the mobile devices with navigation being more and more relevant, the services on mobile in the car, right? But it was the way it was being used was already at that time unsafe. Now we all talk about it's unsafe, it's forbidden by law to use your phone. At that time it was not forbidden, but we saw how unsafe it was, right? And we had, at that time, we had the three most relevant applications on our phone. We had navigation, we had music, and we had calling. And those were the three main use cases that you do in the car. So we built it, and we started a new team. It was the automotive team, and we started to build a technology to integrate that in the vehicle.
Were you the head of that team? Did you create it?
Yeah.
So how did you start with this? Who were you even?
It started with somebody from research, somebody from Nokia Research that had developed a kind of technology to mirror what is on the phone on the display in the car. So that was a technology component that was in research, and we found it out, and we had Navtec, and we understood that we had all the contacts to the automotive business. And if you put those things together, you say, well, this is important. We want to be relevant for our customers also in the vehicle, not only outside the vehicle, right? For our Nokia phone users. So that's how the how MirrorLink got started. So that's so we set up a standardization body, got all the automotive manufacturers, got all the phone manufacturers involved, started standardization, and that was the first connectivity standard, which was not linked to one manufacturer, for instance. So that was, it of course takes a lead time, right? Before you have it in a new car, it takes a couple of years, but we launched with Toyota, we launched with Volkswagen, we launched with Peugeot, and a couple of head unit manufacturers, so aftermarket head unit, like Alpine, for instance. So you could just connect your phone, put it next to you, and have your Nokia Maps application, navigation app, your music application, and calling interface on the display in the car. And that was in 2010.
So this was like Apple has now with the car, but that was
exactly
back then with Nokia. I've never heard of this. So weird.
Yeah, well, you didn't have a driver's license at the time.
Probably. I think I did already, but yeah, it was quite early. Yeah.
No, that's a joke. But yeah, we were first to market. And I think it was just about at that time that we were losing our market share.
Why?
So we developed some.
What,
No, that was the
was it just because
Nokia. At
Apple
that
was
time, Apple
rising,
became second or third generation iPhone, and then it went very quickly, right, with the Nokia phones, and that the transition to Microsoft, etc. So we lost our. Although we had developed the whole standard, we didn't have that power anymore of distribution.
Okay.
So some of my engineers went to Google, and they started Google. What is it? Google Android for in the car.
Yeah.
Right? So now you have that replication. Apple came with Apple CarPlay, but those are not open systems. Those are proprietary. One is Android, one is Apple. So now cars have two of those systems. Some of the new cars still have MirrorLink, but there's no phones doing it anymore. But it was the sort of the strategy, the innovation. It was the right thing to do, because now it's what a lot of companies are doing. But the opportunity actually that we had was bigger than that. So we also saw that a lot of embedded systems, embedded infotainment systems, were really chunky and slow, and the user interface was badly designed. Of course, within Nokia, we had a lot of experience with that to do it better. So we started completely from the user perspective, did a lot of user research, user testing, and started to build a navigation environment that was compelling to users, and started to offer that based on the maps from Navtec that we had to the car manufacturers. So we scored our first big deal with Jaguar Land Rover, who had a really, really bad system and wanted completely new. It was fully connected, right? You could, it was fully, you could send ETA, what time you would be home. You could automatically send that. We had connected parking, you had connected traffic. We had all those kind of things in the first systems. And we were also developing an agile methodology, so we could give the car manufacturers an update every 2 weeks, right? It took them at least half a year before they could do something with it, before they got used to that. So we challenged a lot of our customers. We always provided map data to the traditional tier 1 suppliers who were building navigation, and now we are competing with them as well. But with a completely new, connected and intelligent product, right? That would learn your routes. It would say, "Are you going to work today again?" Like normally,
Yeah.
you only have to say yes instead of entering an address and things like that. You are used to now today in the applications. So that was very successful. Many deals. Jaguar Land Rover, Audi, a couple of Asian manufacturers, and then the interest from the German car manufacturers in what we were doing, right? By that time, we had separated from Nokia as an independent company. We were called HERE, right? In Berlin, in Chicago, and in Asia, we had Netherlands, in Eindhoven. We had about 1,500 employees or so.
Wait, I'm confused. What do you mean you separated from Nokia?
So we were first a division, location and commerce, right? But then we established ourselves as an independent company, 100% owned by Nokia. And that company
like that.
we called.
Why was that step necessary?
Well, because we felt that we would have a better chance if we were independent.
Oh, and so that you wouldn't be influenced by the fragmentation, or?
Yeah, well, Nokia was at that time already almost only a network manufacturer, right? The handset business was sold to Microsoft, so that didn't play a part. But we had such a different business. We were not a networks company. We were selling software and map data and map services to other businesses. So we were just an investment of Nokia at that time. And then we started to talk to the German car manufacturers, and then the consortium of German car manufacturers, Audi, BMW, and Mercedes, they acquired HERE for I think 3.1 billion. I think it was. So they
pretty much bought it from Nokia.
Yeah, from Nokia. Yeah.
So, and this was Audi, BMW, and Mercedes.
Yeah.
Aren't they competitors? I don't know how
Yeah,
the
but
business works.
they have a common interest. This is where where the use of sensor data started to become relevant. A
So
car
they're
has
kind of
about
competitors, but sometimes they collaborate on certain technologies.
a lot, right? Automotive business collaborates a lot. There's a lot of sharing of parts, sharing of platforms, sharing of engines, and things like that.
How can such competitors collaborate on such a level? It kind of almost sounds like space, back from which you describe your stories in space, European Space
Well,
Agency.
it's a matter of scale again. You cannot afford it to do it on your own. So building all the map data would require to drive all the streets, maintain it, etc. Why would you do that separately? Right? There's no. In the best case, you end up with the same data. So that's
How
tripling the
come
cost.
companies like Google do it then?
Well, there are only basically two and a half companies in the world, except for Japan, that do it. Right? Google does it for a different purpose. They don't necessarily sell the data to car manufacturers, right? They do it to support their location-based information kind of organization.
Yeah.
We sell it to navigation. So yeah, Google has been our biggest competitor for here, for sure.
Interesting. So then that consortium of car manufacturers buys it, and then what happens?
So they they of course use that data in their own products, right? So it's a business that needs to run, so they license from a company that they co-own. And at this time, there's many more companies that have joined the ownership, like Cisco and some other Asian companies have joined. So it's a consortium of companies that is investing in this technology because they see the strategic value of that asset.
Because in the company here, which was the company that was in the division from Nokia, it became company here. So how fast did it get to getting acquired for 3.1 billion?
That was, I think, about 7 to 8 months process.
Wow. And was it being actively shopped around, or?
So we looked at multiple buyers. Yeah.
What was
That was the
what
first
was your role in that? Because your position there was vice president, I think.
I was heading the automotive team, right? So automotive was one of the assets
So
that we
you
were
weren't
trying to sell.
actively
So
involved in acquiring
yeah, I was
investors.
actively representing, no, not acquiring, selling it, right? So I was when the customers wanted to know about the automotive business, I was there explaining a lot about the technology in our business. Yeah. But we also had a consumer division and we had a data division. So it was not me only. There was like a whole team of maybe 20, 25 people involved in doing that.
Okay, so then it gets acquired. Sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry. So you get acquired,
No.
and then what's happening then?
So yeah, that of course changes a company, right? Then you become a. So it was a quite. I've been there 5 or 6 years that time, I think, and Renault-Nissan asked. They showed an interest to in me to join their organization to set up a in-house software development organization. Typically, car manufacturers they outsource all this software development to their suppliers. But times are changing, and they see also that there's value in developing your own stack to a certain extent. And the Renault-Nissan Alliance has about 9 brands, right? So that was Renault, Nissan, Dacia, Mitsubishi, Infinity, um, a couple of other smaller, Lada. And there's the Alliance, as it's called. So that is the sort of organization that does things for the purpose of all brands. So we were the first software development team inside the Alliance, building a software stack of connected services and navigation services for all of those brands to be included in those vehicles. So we have teams in UK, Paris, Japan, China. Starting from scratch, building a team about 200 people in the first 6 months.
Well, you were in charge of hiring 200 people in 6 months.
Yeah, I'm in charge of having to build that product.
How
So
do you
then you need people.
start? How do you
You
start?
start with partners. You hire a couple of key persons. You use your own network. You ask some recruiters to help you. You have some companies that you have experiences with that there where you can hire some people, right? So external people. So you build up with more externals, and gradually over time
You start
you
hiring.
change that to you start hiring your core competence that you want to have.
So who were the key people that you were hiring? What were you looking out for?
Yeah, I think for me, I would say the first three key people always to hire is somebody is an architect, a really senior architect that understands that not only technology but also business scalability, things like that. Then a designer, somebody that really understands consumer value, and a good development engineer. Those are that's the first trio that you need, and they often bring good people that they work with, right?
Yeah.
So from there you can continue to build on.
And then from there, pretty much within 6 months, how fast does that curve go? Do you start very slow with your first 3 hires?
We did some acqui-hires. So acquiring a small company, so that gave us 40 people in one go, right? So small acquisitions of good people. So that helps a lot. So
can I ask, like, a small acquisition obviously is relative. How small were the acquisitions if you wanted to buy like a team that you really needed?
Yeah, small is everything under 20 million, right? So it can be 1 million, it can be 4 million, it can be depends a bit on the size and the competence, I would say.
Interesting.
That you can do quickly, right? You can do fairly quickly. There's often one decision maker, the CEO of that company, that you have to deal with. And of course, automotive companies, they do a lot of those acquisitions during a whole year. So the processes are also in place to sort of support that from a governance and a decision point of view.
So pretty much, if the value of which is super relevant, obviously, to start a funding event, if the value of the company is under 20 million, then technically it's like a small acquisition for any big consortium of a company.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
It's good context. Something also, I think first time I heard it phrased that way. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry. So continue. So you were acquiring teams of people. Yeah.
Yeah. So we started to build our services. We had our, I think, first MVP about 6 months later, and we continued to work there and build towards the brands. And so in the automotive companies, you have to sort of look at what are the SOPs when are new cars coming on board or on the market. So you need to sort of make sure that your release timing, etc., is supporting those different kind of launches.
Yeah.
After 2 years, I think VW asked if I would join them.
How come? What happened that transition became relevant?
So why did I change? I think I felt that what I saw in Renault-Nissan, I was building software and products, but it was I would say the challenge at Volkswagen was for me more exciting because it was more focused. It was basically 100% based on self-driving and autonomous, and I felt that that was for me a more. I was dealing with it also at Renault-Nissan to some extent, but more on the side, right? More on the strategic level and thinking about it, not so much on product level and development level.
Well, what do you mean you were just strategic level? What do you do then? Just thinking about it? Don't you have to create something?
Well, in a car company, when you talk about strategies and product development, etc., you often sit with a number of people together that have different perspectives to discuss strategies, right? So I was often involved in many projects and strategies for that were beyond my own responsibility in that sense. So if we talk about, okay, what is the future of automotive in terms of personal ownership, right? With Uber and Lyft, etc., and self-driving, then you need to have a number of people with different perspectives, a number of experience and seniority to start discussing that, and what are the implications for us as a company. Right?
Yeah.
So that's those kind of strategy talks, and based on, and that leads to decisions, right? Business decisions, where to invest and where not to invest, or what to emphasize and what not to emphasize.
So your focus is very much being part of those discussions and not specifically developing products.
No, I was doing my development team, my products and services,
Yeah.
right? But I was also involved in a lot of those strategy discussions.
And what did
that's
Volkswagen
a part of the role. Yeah, so Volkswagen was, of course, it goes back. It's of course the biggest, right? As the largest reach. By doing something right at Volkswagen, you can also have the largest impact. It was couple of years after the diesel scandal, right? So it was also a new Volkswagen started to become there, right?
How come it was a new, like what changed? Because obviously it was quite a scandal.
Well, I wasn't there before, but I spoke a lot to Matthias Müller at that time, the CEO, and before I made my decision to join. And what I heard, the intentions, the strategy to go to electric, what they wanted to achieve in terms of autonomous. So there was a lot of strong intent to change and a lot of strong visions on what the future should be, and I felt that was exciting to be part of.
How come Volkswagen decided to go electric? Was it because of Tesla, or was it something that, how come it happened?
Well, that's a process, right? It's not a decision that's taken in one moment. Everything plays a role there. But of course, the legislation plays a role, right? In terms of, if you look at, but also, what do you believe in as a company, right? So if you go back 10 years, right, in time from now, the company values or company ethics were formulated differently than today.
Yeah,
for sure, right? Now that's also true for automotive companies. The automotive companies, they have always, one of their core values, right, was always giving freedom to people, right? Go wherever you want, right? That's one of the core value propositions that a car provides to you. But what has come into that place, you cannot continue doing that at the expense of the environment, right? So as a car company, you have to take your responsibility also. Now, and Volkswagen has taken their responsibility by moving the sort of the propulsion, right? So from going from a combustion engine to an electric engine is just changing the drivetrain, right? So they can still provide you with that sense of freedom, right, and that sense of independence, but not at the expense of the environment.
Did you think it was like very much because a company like Tesla took the first kind of step towards that, or?
Tesla has been a great example and is a great company, something to look up to, because, but it's similar to Volkswagen. Volkswagen has a legacy, right? Volkswagen has 600,000 employees.
Yeah, which is why I was interested in asking it. Was it because of Tesla, or was it something that was like
never alone, right? So if you say it was because of Tesla, I cannot say yes. Did Tesla play a role? Of course.
Yeah.
Right. It's never one reason. It's not only Tesla.
But so it was in the
So
back of...
in the beginning, so Tesla, they have made, what is it, 2/4 of profit, right? So if you look at Tesla from a business point, you do not go to electric because of Tesla, right? Because they don't make a profit. That would mean that Volkswagen could not pay its employees, right? Yeah. So as Volkswagen, you also have an obligation to your employees, of course, right? 600,000 people that have families, that have mortgages, that need to go on holiday, that need to buy food, right? That's a lot of responsibility. So you cannot just change, right? And at the same time, 5 years back, most electric cars looked a bit weird, right? So there was not a compelling example, right? Tesla for sure has been the first compelling example that had enough kind of range to drive, and has shown a fantastic, I would say, consumer experience in terms of the software stack in the vehicle, right?
Yeah.
And they could start from scratch, so they focused on that. Right? It's more of a software product than a hardware product. Right? So there's a couple of things that are really aspiring and a good example from Tesla for all the car manufacturers, not only Volkswagen. Right? But Volkswagen and all the other car manufacturers, they come from a different angle. They have existing models, they have existing processes, so there's a lot more to change, right? And what we are now seeing, what Volkswagen is launching in the market, is also car manufacturers, right? They have a lot of platforms. They share chassis, they share engines, right? It's also called a platform. It's not a software platform. It's a different kind of platform, and it's a platform in terms of sharing the cost for the benefit of lower cost, and there's not a lot of now. Volkswagen has now launched the first real electric platform designed for electric vehicles, right? The MEB, sort of a modulare elektrobouwkasten. So they can develop a lot of different vehicles on top of that. And it's really designed for electric vehicles, with the battery, with the harnesses, with the safety, with the weight distribution. So the electric vehicles that Volkswagen will bring on the market this year, with the ID.3 the first and others to follow, right? They are real high quality electric vehicles with enough range at a low price, right? So Tesla is still expensive. If Volkswagen starts to build their vehicles, electric vehicles, the consumer expects the price of a Golf or a Polo, right? Not the price of a Tesla S.
Yeah.
There's different expectations towards our brand than towards Tesla's brand. Different customers also. So it's going to be very exciting to see the first vehicles based on this electric platform coming to market this year and then the next years to come, right? And that's true for other car manufacturers as well.
Do you think that the whole Corona thing will slow down what is happening with the new electric platform of VW then?
Well, of Corona has an impact on many industries, and of course also car industries. A lot of just operational impact, right? Factories are shut down today because of safety, health safety, right? So, that's very bad for the whole industry. But I don't think I don't see a necessary impact in this transition from combustion to electric. But let's see, the personal ownership was on decline, right? More and more sharing of vehicles and shared vehicles, shared cars, etc. But maybe people find it now more important to have their own vehicle, which is clean, which they trust, they cannot get infected. So maybe, if you look at the numbers of Uber and Lyft, so their business declined with about 85-90% almost, right?
Yeah. Well, Uber
people
Eats
don't want to.
Is very popular though.
Yeah, it's a different business. Yeah, but so I don't know. We don't know what the future will be after Corona in terms of how people want to move around. Though is their own car going to be reappreciated more because of health and infection kind of concerns?
Yeah.
Is that maybe 2 years only and after that it's gone, or is that staying? Or is it not an issue, right? I don't know.
So sorry, to get back. So now you are being recruited by VW, and what's happening?
Yeah, so So there I was, for the most part, amongst some other things, I've been involved in the self-driving strategy of Volkswagen as a group. So we did a number of pilots with a number of different startups, and in the end, I visited with a large team of most of the brands and some people from the group, many of the startups in the world, and in the end, we have decided based on the business outlook, investments, what the value for us to join and invest in a startup in the US in Argo AI. As a result, that was end of beginning of last year that we made that step. So there was a lot of interactions with a lot of different companies, doing a lot of testing, seeing where the business would be for Volkswagen, with what kind of vehicles and what kind of countries. Is it China, Europe, US?
What were some of the conclusions of all the testing and
so that I think of course there's a bit of a hype on autonomous driving, in the sense that there's many companies that easily get funding to set up teams and start building, and it's relatively easy to showcase a first result, to put some sensors on a car, have it drive, make a corner, etc. But that's not where the challenge is, right? The challenge is in the long tail of all the things you can predict, you can test it, you have to handle safely. So if there's maybe 60, 70 companies out there that say they do autonomous driving, I think there's maybe 5 to 10 that tackle the problem in the right way, and that maybe a full hand that survives in the end.
And what is the right way? What are you looking out for when autonomous driving is happening?
Well, like I said, right, so it's being able to handle the unknown.
Can you give examples of what you guys are looking out for during testing?
Just go on the street. Let's go on the street. So the number of the different permutations of possibilities of things that can happen on the street, things that you encounter, situations, cars, pedestrians, cyclists. Just go to any city in China, what happens on the street there, or anywhere, like people breaking rules. So all the different kind of ways people behave in traffic, right? So the problem is you cannot define a number of test cases, right?
Yep.
That to keep it simple, that capture all those different situations. So that's the long tail. The long tail of situations that you need to be able to handle is very long, and the consequence of not handling that situation correctly could be death.
Yeah.
Right. So the system needs to be developed in such a way that it's not showing that it can handle that situation, but it needs to be able to interpret an unknown situation and handle it correctly. That is the real underlying challenge. So
that is almost like true AI being able to think for itself.
Only AI, yeah. Only AI. And so you cannot throw away data, right? There's many times it's like you can recognize, if you recognize something what it is, you can first see it, then interpret it, and then interpret it correctly, and then handle, take the right commands, brake, steer, whatever, that is okay. But what if you detect something and you don't know what it is? And what if you detect something but there is nothing? Or what if there is something you don't detect it, right? And then all the sort of everything around. So you can never throw away data, because you never know what it. So you have to work with data that you don't recognize, and then still do the right thing.
So how far do you think the technology is from really rolling out? Looking at your expertise.
Yeah, I think if you Google opinions about that, and if you look at what, let's just stick to what commercially has been promised, right? Google promised to go live last year, GM Cruise promised to go live last year. They have all delayed. And that's not because they are bad teams or their technology is bad, but because the problem is just hard. The long tail is long. So it's extremely promising. I think the first companies that are piloting this year, and now due to Corona probably later, but this year would be the first year that 4 or 5 companies would take consumers on board in testing in a well-defined area in the city. Until now, only Waymo has been doing that, right, in Phoenix, Arizona. They had consumers, people on board, bringing to school and to shops, etc., in a well-defined area. You could order a Waymo and get in the back seat, and nobody was in the car.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
that's been there for about 2 years.
So what do you think then? Okay, so Waymo is doing that already. What do you think then if you look at what Tesla is doing with their autopilots?
So yeah, that's autopilot is a marketing name, right? Let's start there. So Tesla, of course, is not a self-driving vehicle. It's a smart cruise control at this moment.
Yeah.
Right. And what they are doing is they're gathering a lot of data. So every Tesla that runs around has cameras on board, and they gather all the data. They gather what the consumers do to avoid that. They have all the sort of things that are near misses, near escapes, things that went well, that all goes in. And Tesla is learning every day from that fleet of vehicles.
Yeah.
So their learning curve is very high, and their long tail that they build from things that happen is also, they have a lot of data, they learn a lot. So that's very positive for Tesla, for the technology development of that.
So how can a Google or a Waymo or even Volkswagen, is Volkswagen rolling out cameras on all their...
Most all cars have cameras today already, right?
So they're already also gathering that data.
Yeah, of course. All the companies that develop autonomous driving, they have fleets, right? But the benefit of Tesla is they have a fleet of consumers driving around, gathering data.
Oh, but Volkswagen doesn't have it in the consumer car yet.
It's not about Volkswagen, it's about all the car manufacturers. They have, every car manufacturer that is working with a partner in self-driving, the fleet is limited, and it's often in 2 or 3 locations, right? But they can directly interact, they can retest, redo it, etc. Tesla is only gathering data and then using that data in simulations to sort of see how but they don't have a self-driving vehicle, right? The difference there, so self-driving is in 5 levels, defined in 5 levels, right? You have level 1 to 5.
Yeah. So what are
from level 4 onwards, right? Until level 4, from level 4 onwards, the driver is no longer responsible. So up to level 3, or 4 minus, you could say, depends a bit on the definition. The driver is part of the solution to stay safe.
Yeah.
So the driver is always responsible. And so you have to be fail safe, and you need to be fail operational. That means that if one error happens, right, you need to come to a safe situation. And fail operational means if there's one failure, you still need to have a certain level of operation in the vehicle, so it can still drive and brake and steer, etc. Now, Tesla is in the system. The driver is still responsible. Yeah. There's many cases that the Tesla system cannot handle, and that you as a driver need to. So you're part of the safety loop. The driver is part of the safety loop. Only until you have removed the driver from the safety loop, then you have a real autonomous vehicle. And then level 4 is on well-known roads, so where you have a detailed map and so you know the environment. And level 5 is actually the car can drive itself in any environment. So it doesn't need the map. It only uses local sensors to see where it can go.
Do you think level 5 will be possible?
Who knows? I don't know. But if you don't put your ambition high enough, you will only end up lower, right? So
Right.
all the systems, they are working up towards achieving level 4 in a well mapped area, being able to handle all situations without a driver in the safety loop.
So what were you doing within Volkswagen? Your focus was getting to level 4 on a fleet.
Yeah, finding the technology partner. This is such a specific technology that no single car manufacturer has that competence in house.
So
Right? So
it's
that
almost
is,
like all car manufacturers should create this consortium, just like you explained with BMW and Audi, and then
yeah, you could
feed all
say
the
that.
data into
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you could do that, but I think at this moment, self-driving is still seen as a competitive edge. So car manufacturers are still competing there to have their own software stack, right? So you see, there's many companies that partner with car manufacturers on that, right? So Argo, the example, right? So Volkswagen has invested with Ford in Argo AI. We have Aurora, which is a company, they work with Fiat and with Kia. Fiat Chrysler works with Waymo. So there's all these leading. GM works with cruise automation, right? So all these self-driving companies, they are partnering with car manufacturers to build the software for them. That's how the industry currently works.
And then your focus was to make sure to find the right startup to invest in and then develop it with them, or?
Yeah.
Cool. So what are you doing nowadays? Very long intro.
Yeah. So I've so when I came back from the US in 2010,
10, yeah.
I think, then since then my family has lived in the Netherlands, and I've been commuting in Europe, living in Berlin, living in Paris, living in Wolfsburg. So after 10 years of traveling every week, from a personal point of view, I wanted to stop that. So I've at this moment I'm trying to set up my own consulting business, actually in innovation and digital transformation disruptions, and I'm on the board of a couple of companies. So I'm trying to some startups and some technology companies
Do you
to
invest
help
in
them.
startups as well, or do you just join as a advisor?
At this moment, I'm not investing, but could be if I want or not. But that's not at this moment something that I'm pursuing. So I'm just taking it a little bit. I've taken a little bit of like a corporate pause, and
Yeah.
maybe develop something more. Develop a number of activities with startups, technology companies that I can help with my experience and my what I've learned, and help them achieve and be successful. That's what I like and what I try to build up, and with a base in the Netherlands, basically.
What do you think the future will be of all of this connectivity and autonomous stuff? Everything you've been involved with, from space to civil engineering to software.
I think the trend that we've seen, that technology becomes cheaper and more things become embedded, what we all call IoT, and so that will continue. And it will become more and more pervasive for sure. But there will also be and more people will be able to do it, right? So that trend is not gonna stop. But um, if you look at these events like Corona, of course, they potentially have an impact on globalization that we've had, right? So everybody is in trouble now because nobody has any stock of things, right? So the whole logistics, the just-in-time logistics, which is that the best model going forward?
What do you think?
I don't know. I'm not a logistics expert, but maybe mobility, right? So I'm talking a lot about mobility with other companies. So um, I think if you look at the big cities, the trends in today in cities, in the U.S. cities, for instance, 75% of the real estate, the place in the city, is used for parking of cars. 75%.
Yeah, I heard that. There's a good video on that.
That's ridiculous, right? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we are putting hundreds and hundreds of billions in supporting people and their businesses to stay alive during Corona, etc. But the most expensive real estate grounds, in the cities, we are using for a car that is being used 4% of the time.
Yeah.
So that's all lost money. So I think we will not allow the society and people, the public, governments will not allow this waste of money to continue.
I think that the reason that was happening, I've read somewhere, is because there's legislation that forces certain stores or businesses to have parking space for every square meter of store space that they have. And that's why you have these crazy things like parking spots and everything.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point that you say, right? So it also means that if it's regulated, you can change it.
Yeah, except they're not changing it. I don't know why.
The cities will take more control in terms of how transport, how mobility, who are the mobility providers, right? So more modalities, more different mobility modalities, public transport, mass transport, last mile, walking, biking, you name it. All this will start to play a more important role, but the integration of that for you as a consumer to really make it easy and seamless and simple for you to go from A to B without having to manage all that complexity of all the different modalities.
Yeah.
That's where we will have to go to with mobility with these complex and large cities.
I think that's where legislation really needs to keep up, but I guess it's hard because with politicians, they're just growing older and older. By the time, innovations come in, they just don't even understand it. Well, at least that's the impression I'm getting when I look at some of the things that are happening in the US or when I'm visiting there. It's hard.
Yeah, but there's also good examples of cities, if you take the city of Berlin or Zurich or Bordeaux in France.
Rotterdam is a good city like that as well. Very innovative, keeping up with a lot of things that are being rolled out usually get rolled out in Rotterdam first due to the connectivity in the city.
Yeah. So Netherlands has a high degree of connectivity as well. So it's often a place where you see a lot of these things starting.
Yeah.
So I think it's not a bad place for Netherlands for startups to investigate or pilot or test. I think it's I'm not sure if age is the deciding factor.
I think it's more technical literacy would be the right
term. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
so it's like I said, you can only connect the dots when you look back. But so it's a lot of new technology, a lot of innovation. Having had the luxury and the luck to be a bit of a startup in bigger companies many times, entrepreneur in bigger companies, but working a lot with partners and smaller companies always. So that's a little bit of the red thread to that story.
Now that we've reflected about it, what do you think your biggest learning lessons are from everything that you've done? Because you went into way different industries and you've really kind of played with the top of them, from music industry to connectivity now, autonomous driving. You were in space. Working on really cool projects. What is the biggest learning lessons? I've heard a couple already. You can't do it alone when you're at the top. And
yeah, I think that is. I find it a difficult question because the biggest learnings, What if it's not true for this new case, right? So
Yeah.
I think you have always to be alert if your learnings apply, or will they apply a little bit different. So I think that I'm a strong believer in trying things out. That's important. So go out there and learn. That is extremely important, and don't be afraid to change your mind. So a lot of things fail because people start a certain way and are afraid to change. They say there's too much cost involved. There's too much sunk cost. We have this and this people relying on us, etc. Yeah, true, but in the end, it won't fly if you don't change, and that sunk cost only gets more. So don't be afraid to change based on actual learnings, right? Because that's why you're going out there to learn,
Right.
not to ignore. And often people go out and learn, and then the learnings they try to perceive and interpret them such a way that it becomes an excuse to continue. Well, deep down inside, you feel it's actually not good. No, it's wrong. We should do something else. So do that. Learn and be brave enough to change based on the learnings. And I think diversity. I'm extremely grateful to a lot of people that joined my team and joined me in other teams and follow, and because of their own strength. So trust others.
Yeah.
You will not be able to do it yourself. So find a team that does not agree with you, that challenges you. That is really important. But you need to share a passion. You need to share a vision, right? But you do not have to share opinions.
What does that look like in real life? Because a lot of people say that it's becoming quite cliche, but how would you explain it to somebody who's starting, really, that diversity, which is like vision and mission and core values? I guess
think
have to be
it's
similar.
about curiosity, right? It's about being curious. I think that's also what you try to do in your talks a little bit. You're curious about other people, what they've done, right? And you open up your ears and you start to listen. So as a leader, as a startup, you need to be curious about how do others do it? What can I learn from this person? If you ask a certain person about an opinion and he talks about something else, let him talk about that else, because that's apparently important for that person. So I think it's not sticking to your predetermined road or plan all the time, but be curious and let other influences affect you and impact you.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. What I always ask also, I'm always interested when I'm talking to people, what kind of books do you usually read, or do you recommend for people who are starting their journeys to read?
Yeah, I'm not. So in my free time, I've done a lot of sailing, and I like to go in the mountains and things like that. So I like books that talk about people that do tough things. Like I have a large collection of climber books, right? People that go in the mountains, things that go wrong, go well. Those kind of.
Do you have an example of a book, a good read?
Yeah, it's. There's so many. I can't recall a title now directly. Of course, there's this amazing book, but it's already a bit older. What's it now called? From Joe Simpson, the guy who was going in the mountains. If you've never read it, I'll send you the title later over email. But he goes up in the mountain with a friend. They have to go down. Something. He breaks his leg. So he goes down, and then he falls into a crevasse in the glacier. And then his mate gives
didn't
him
they make a movie
up.
about that?
They made a movie, but you have to read the book for sure.
The book is better?
Things like, yeah, I would say so. It's less Hollywood.
Nice.
Anyhow, but also a lot of books about. There's an enormous amount of books about people that shipwreck in the middle of the ocean and have to catch turtles and survive on water from turtle things like that. I find that a lot of amazing to read. A lot of biographies. Maybe it's my age. I start to become more interested in history also a little bit more now, and the occasional biography, of course, from people, but also sometimes just like a thriller or a novel.
What was a good
quite
biography
diverse.
you read?
Of course, I read Steve Jobs, but I'm not sure if it's so overhyped, so much talked about. So, but it's nice to read. It's nice to read. I liked I liked Elon Musk's recent biography. I like that a bit better, actually.
What did you like about it? Because he's also an engineer, kind of.
It's just, yeah, I think his trust in technology is like amazing. He takes giant leaps, has an enormous trust in that technology will be able to solve a problem that he doesn't apprehend yet. So he's very brave in that sense. So I like that.
What do you mean brave? Just because
he takes
trusts...
huge risks based on and thinks out of the box how to solve things, right? So it's just mind blowing. I think that the number of companies that he has started and the impact of those companies with SpaceX, with Hyperloop, with Tesla.
What do you think? Actually, we didn't cover that in the beginning, but what do you think about SpaceX as a space engineer who actually worked, before the Iron Curtain on everything? And everything was government funded, you said. I didn't ask you that question, but what do you think now of companies like SpaceX? And
well, if we wouldn't have SpaceX, we couldn't bring anybody to the International Space Station.
Yeah, but that's a very private company who's, I think, looking for profit. So that is completely different to 20, 30 years ago.
And that's so amazing about it. That's so brave about it. So if there was one industry where everybody would have thought this is typical government, right?
Yeah.
It's the one that broke that dogma. So I think it's also that would not have been possible 20 years ago because of the technology advances. So all the sensors that have become available at low price, at mass, and things like that. But also, I would say the policy. So if you look at the requirements of the typical traditional space industry, right? All the ruggedized components, for instance, right? So instead of a transistor costing like a hundredth of a cent, it will cost €1. The only ruggedized CPU that was available at that time was maybe 186, right? While in the laptops you had a 486, Intel 486. They're old now, but at that time that was top of the bill. So your computing power was limited. So one project we did is the space station was the requirement was to build a ruggedized computer to control the robotic arm. It was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of euros. And with a team, we decided we're going to do it differently. We're going to bring 20 iPads and ThinkPads, IBM ThinkPads at that time.
Yeah.
And if it breaks, take the next. Right. So instead of spending a lot of money in a ruggedized computer with a very low capacity to do anything, we just brought commercial computers, put some metal plates on it, etc., for the flying ions, etc. And then when it broke down in these harsh conditions, you just took the next.
But
so
wait,
tenths of the price.
But we're talking about changing it in space, right?
Yeah. So you took that. Then that was in the International Space Station. Then they would have IBM ThinkPads on board instead of a very expensive ruggedized computer with an old CPU, then they had full computing power of a modern computer.
But wait, but so isn't it? What if all 10 break?
As an example. Sorry?
What if all
Yeah, over
10
time, yeah.
But so isn't it expensive to ship more? Like, isn't?
Oh, that was no, because you would have like for those ruggedized computer, you need to have one on board, 1 second, one spare, one testing. Then so you had like 6 or 7 of those, right? So it was like many millions, and they would then last 5 years, and the ThinkPad would last maybe 6 months, but every 6 months you would just put a new one there. So completely out of the box, different approach.
Yeah.
That would boost the capacity to sort of work with a strong CPU and do all kinds of things that were not possible on the ruggedized computer at a much lower cost. Just changing the policy.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's what he did with SpaceX, right? He changed the policy, how things are being done. He developed. He took different decisions.
Yeah, that's a good analogy as to what SpaceX is doing. I guess to close off, I do have one question that I wanted to ask in the beginning. At one point you covered, I asked you for funny stories, and you said you have funnier stories about the astronaut time. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of stories can you share from that time?
It was just a very interesting time at that time. Of course, if you look at the old Russia at that time, their space program was not so well financed as the American space program. And I was the lead engineer for human engineering at that time. So everything that was designed to be operated by astronauts or cosmonauts on the International Space Station around that arm, inside and outside, was under my responsibility. So we had to do a lot of user testing and a lot of meetings. And in those meetings, I had then 5 astronauts and 5 cosmonauts around the table, and me. Right? And those people were all in space, right? They have been in space many times, and we were discussing then ideas and designs and specifications. And I was never been in space, so that was very interesting. But also, these are amazing people, amazing. The astronauts and cosmonauts. These are really, they're extremely intelligent. They're extremely kind. They're very empathic. They listen well. They are very smart and quick. So they're really superhumans in a certain sense. That's what I noticed as well. But also being in Russia, you know, the people there, they were so kind. They invited us to the labs, right? So there we saw the prototype of the first Sputnik. The responsible person there was the lead engineer of the Sputnik, right? He was now the head of the department. And then this is a story which is wider known, right? But how do they, with so little money, how did they do all this, right? So, of course, when you're in space, there's no gravity, right? And so if you use a ball pen to make notes, why does the ink go down? Because of gravity.
Yeah.
Right? So in space, when you have a ball pen to make notes, there's no gravity, so the ink doesn't come out. So that's why the US developed the Papermate. The Papermate is this pencil which is pressurized, so you can write in space. But the cost of that was a couple of $100,000 at that time. It was very expensive, and each of those pens is a little bit expensive. So what did the Russians do? They didn't have money for the Papermate, so they used a crayon, a potlood, a crayon.
Yeah.
That doesn't need gravity, that just works, right? But there's a downside of that, of course. If you start to use a crayon on paper, small particles of carbon start to float in the air. And after a year, after 2 years, they make somewhere a shortcut in the computer.
Ooh.
Right? So you can go to space with a crayon, but the long-term effect is a shortage somewhere. Things like that. So those are the typical differences. The different choices that Russian Space Agency at that time and American Space Agency, right, made in order to do the same thing. And I've worked with one of the cosmonauts was He was decorated twice as the hero of the Soviet Union because he saved Mir 1 and he saved Mir 2. So Mir 1, he went outside and fixed a hole while he wasn't allowed to go outside because his suit was leaking, and he taped his suit and he pressurized it and said, I can make it, go outside, disconnect the connectivity in the radio, right? So I'm going outside, disconnect, go outside, repair, go in and say, switch on the radio again, it's fixed. And,
he just
against
had
the orders.
Pretty much just taped.
Yeah, taped, put this like these tubes from the air conditioning and the pipes over his joints and taped it. So, and measured the leakage in his suit, went out, fixed it, got back in and said it's fixed against the orders, right? And it's fantastic to hear the stories of those guys, how they did it, right? And he got decorated Soviet Union hero.
What was he like in real life? Like just normal, or was he quick, smart? Like what popped out?
Yeah.
Thinking about him.
Well, it was like sometimes these times are referred to as cowboys. He was a Russian cowboy for sure. It was like he was brave, but was also intelligent. But there was a level. The American astronauts are very sophisticated, right? Very, I would say, and the Russian cosmonauts are a bit more, I would say, they have the same intelligence and educational as well, but they are a little bit more cowboys.
Yeah, that's right.
In a good way. In a good way.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
these kind of stories. Yeah.
That is, I think, one of the best stories to close this with, because it's been already quite a while. Do you have some last tips for maybe companies or audience members, listeners who want to get into space, connectivity, autonomous driving? They want to start a company or do something. Do you have tips for them?
Wow. I would just say what drives me is you have to believe in something. You have to feel the passion for something, and then you should just go. Make sure you solve a problem. And then do it with passion and do it with honesty, and then see how it goes. I think that's the most important. Stay honest to yourself. If it's not a good idea, stop. Go on to the next.
Nice. I think that's a great way to close it. So thank you so much for visiting. Do you have something to promote or something you want to do or something you want to share? This is the space where you can do it.
No, if somebody wants to get in contact with me, of course, they are more than welcome. I'm always happy to have a listening ear or help somebody. I'm very interested to work with startups and technology companies, so let's leave it at that. So
nice. Thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lova.
If you liked this episode, you can check out our most recent one here, and if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group where you can find thousands of like-minded people and you get direct access and support to any business question from the entire startup funding event team.